If you die before you die, you won't die when you die. That's the key. I call it the immortality key. It's the big job. It's what we're all looking for, right? The meaning of life? What does it mean to be alive? What happens when we die? Is there a God? Is there a point to any of this? Well, according to the ancient philosophers and mystics, there are answers to these questions, like real answers. They're not hidden away in some book or some dark corner of the internet. They're not necessarily in your local church or temple. And even if Moses, Jesus, and the Buddha himself were sitting in your living room, they couldn't tell you. Because it's nothing you can actually learn. Nothing for your rational brain to compute, at least. You know, my hero, the late Joseph Campbell, once said, "It's not the meaning of life that we're after."
People say that what we're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that the life experiences that we have on the purely physical plane will have resonances within that are those of our own innermost being and reality. And so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive.
But you can't very well experience that rapture until you've experienced its opposite. You don't know what you got till it's gone, says Joni Mitchell. So until you've experienced death, not in some abstract or metaphorical way, but an actual death that feels acutely and terrifyingly real in this lifetime, how can you know what it means to be alive? And how can you even talk about an afterlife until you've seen it for yourself? These are the mysteries. Now, in some form or another, these mysteries made their way through the high civilizations of antiquity. Ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, China. But it comes to us, to Western civilization, through the ancient Greeks, many of whom spent a lot of time in North Africa, by the way. 13 years in the case of Plato, the godfather of Western thought. So what did we inherit from these high civilizations? What are these mysteries? Like the mysteries of Eleusis that called to the best and brightest of Athens and Rome, including Plato and Marcus Aurelius, from about 1500 BC to the 4th century AD. They were sacred rituals for turning mortals into immortals. You went to Eleusis as a human being, and you walked away a god. How did that happen? Through the ceremonial experience of death and rebirth. Let's be very clear. Eleusis and the other mystery cults of the time were the real religion of the ancient Greeks, the people who built Western civilization, democracy, the arts and sciences, the theater that became our Hollywood, the Olympic Games that became our sports industry, the open marketplace of ideas that we take for granted every day on social media. Didn't you ever wonder how the people who invented all this, and the very word for skepticism, could somehow believe in a bunch of fairy tales? Did they really think Zeus was perched on some mountaintop, hurling thunderbolts down at us hapless humans? Or Poseidon was in the middle of the sea, patrolling the wind and waves with a freaking trident? Come on, man. Take Cicero, the great Roman statesman of the 1st century BC. He called Eleusis the most exceptional and divine thing Athens ever produced. Not democracy and free speech and all the rest of it. Eleusis was the thing we could never forget. It was said to hold the entire species together. Why? Because you went to its sacred temple to experience nothing less than death and rebirth. And only those who had made the long march from Athens to the torchlit sanctuary, drunk a magic potion, and witnessed the blessed sight and vision, as Plato called it, were said to conquer death. By experiencing just a taste of immortality, that rapture of being alive. And if you think about it, that's more science than religion. Once you've seen God, there's no unseeing God. You've proven the hypothesis for yourself. So what the hell was going on? Frankly, we don't know. It was all secret. To reveal what you saw in Eleusis was to risk execution, which is why Huston Smith, perhaps the most influential religious scholar of the 20th century, called it the best kept secret in history. Like other rites of passage, it was thought some archaic techniques of ecstasy were to blame for that famous vision at Eleusis. The same techniques employed since time immemorial in tribal initiation rites or admission to a secret society to create that near-death experience, like fasting and sleep deprivation. I mean, that'll definitely get the job done, but there was another possibility. Remember that magic potion? In Greek, it was called the koukion. a kind of primitive beer. But it wasn't the only magic potion splashing around the Mediterranean. Dionysus, the Greek god of ecstasy and madness, he had a potion too. To drink his holy wine was to drink the blood of the god. In fact, you were drinking the god to become the god. This is where we get the whole idea of enthusiasm, from the Greek word enthusiazo. The essence of the god lives within you. You have become divine. So what kind of beer and wine was this? In 1978, at the height of the war on drugs, a controversial theory claimed these magic potions must have been some crazy psychedelic concoction. Beer and wine spiked with mind-altering drugs. Maybe that was the best-kept secret behind the vision at Eleusis that lasted for 2,000 years. Maybe that fueled the wild parties of Dionysus in the mountains and forests, from Spain to Italy to Greece to the Holy Land, giving birth to our poetry and music, our comedy and tragedy. Either way, the psychedelic theory was the wrong idea at the wrong time, with no hard scientific data to support it. Now, why does any of this matter? Because at the time, there was another healer who was into the mysteries, and he had a magic potion too, and it made you immortal too. And he told weird stories that were recorded in ancient Greek, the same ancient Greek that was spoken by Plato and the initiates of the Greek mysteries. And when this healer was asked why he told such weird stories or parables, he said, well, I'm talking about mysteria here. And he uses that word in Greek, mysteries. I'm not going to share the damn secret with just anybody, he says. But I'll tell you what, I'm here to give sight to the blind, as long as you die for it. You must be born again before you can see God's kingdom, he says. And once you do that, I tell you for certain, in Greek he says, amen, amen, like for real, that you will see heaven open and God's angels going up and down. In Greek, this healer was Jesus. We call him Jesus. And just like Dionysus, he was the Son of God, born of a virgin, who took on human flesh to leave us a gift. The gift of holy wine, his blood, that turns humans into gods. But unlike Dionysus, Jesus founded the biggest religion the world has ever known. Today it's 2.5 billion people, like a third of the planet. And if the earliest Christians knew how to brew up a psychedelic beer or mix up a psychedelic wine, and those magic potions were a direct path to die before you die, to have that vision of the kingdom of heaven, and the best-kept secret of Christianity is the same as the best-kept secret of the ancient Greece that preceded it, then it would rewrite the entire history of Western civilization. Now, the real question is, what does this all mean for us today? How do we die before we die in the 21st century? There's no one answer, of course, but in our leading medical schools, psychedelics are proving to be a safe and reliable means of producing that death and rebirth experience of the ancient mysteries. Now, I've never done them myself. Psychedelics are absolutely not for everybody. They are powerful and unpredictable and need to be approached with caution and reverence. But under the right conditions and with the right preparation, there are genuine mystical reports. Over the past 20 years, almost 75% of the volunteers at Johns Hopkins and NYU who've taken just one dose of psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, will rank it among the most meaningful experiences of their lives. So as these compounds become legal in the coming years, it begs a big question. Have the mysteries returned? Well, some of these clinical volunteers say their psilocybin journey is like a mini death all in itself, a foreshadowing of what awaits them at the end of life. And just like the initiates of the mysteries of Eleusis, or the mysteries of Dionysus, or the earliest Christians 2,000 years ago, by pre-experiencing their death, they found the immortality key. They've rediscovered that ancient principle. The only way to experience God is to let go of the rational mind. And when the ego gives up, your consciousness begins to expand beyond the body, beyond space and time, beyond the very categories of being and non-being, to find itself looking back at itself. Well, there's your new definition of God, said Joseph Campbell. But if you don't die now, you might never experience that ultimate mystery of being as the mystery of your being. That to know yourself at the deepest level is really to know God. I mean, we don't have a word for it, but we call it God, this divine spark that lives in you. And you might never understand that heaven is not what happens when the physical body wastes away, and there is no afterlife. Because there is no after. There's only right here, right now. The kingdom of the Father is spread upon the earth, says the Gospel of Thomas, and people do not see it. For the ancient philosophers and mystics, it was never about living forever within the field of time, just going on and on until the stars fade and the cosmos goes dark. It was never about life after death. It was always about venturing into the timelessness of the infinite present to realize your own divinity and the divinity of everyone and everything around you, which is love in its purest form. Maybe that's what it means to be fully alive. And maybe that's what ancient sacraments were for, like holy beer and holy wine, to help us glimpse that perfect love and perfect peace. And maybe what we're seeing now is a modern-day sacrament descending on Western civilization. During her psilocybin session, one of the volunteers, Dinah Baser, a self-described atheist, had the overwhelming feeling of being bathed in God's love, and the sudden epiphany that every moment is an eternity of its own. This sounds awfully familiar. If you die before you die, you won't die when you die. An Bethanis, prin Bethanis, denta Bethanis, otan Bethanis. Well, if that's the best kept secret in history, maybe it's time for the secret to get out.
There are 196 countries in the world today, and virtually none of them have purple on their national flag. Throughout history, purple was never used to represent a kingdom, civilization, or empire. So what's wrong with purple? It's such a popular color today. Why would no country use it in their flag? The answer is really quite simple. Purple was just far too expensive. No countries have purple on their flag because up until the 1800s, purple was worth more than its weight in gold. The color purple has been associated with royalty, power, and wealth for centuries. In fact, Queen Elizabeth I forbade anyone except close members of the royal family to wear it. Purple's elite status stems from the rarity and cost of the dye originally used to produce it. The dye initially used to make purple came from the Phoenician trading city of Tyre, which is now in modern-day Lebanon. Fabric traders obtained the dye from a small sea snail that was only found in the Tyre region of the Mediterranean. A lot of work went into producing the dye, as more than 10,000 snails were needed to create just 1 gram of Tyrian purple. Since only wealthy rulers could afford to buy and wear the color, it became associated with the imperial classes of Rome, Egypt, and Persia. Purple also came to represent spirituality and holiness because the ancient emperors, kings, and queens that wore the color were often thought of as gods or descendants of the gods. Sometimes, however, the dye was too expensive even for royalty. 3rd century Roman Emperor Aurelian famously wouldn't allow his wife to buy a shawl made from Tyrian purple silk because it literally cost 3 times its weight in gold. A single pound of dye cost 3 pounds of gold, which is the equivalent of $56,000 today. So since the sheer price of purple was so astronomically high, no one, not even the richest nations, could afford to have purple on their flag. The hue became more accessible to lower classes about a century and a half ago. In 1856, 18-year-old English chemist William Henry Perkin accidentally created a synthetic purple compound while attempting to synthesize quinine, an anti-malaria drug. He noticed that the compound could be used to dye fabrics, so he patented the dye, manufactured it, and got filthy rich. Purple dye was then mass-produced, so just about everybody could afford it. The elite stopped valuing purple and the status symbol faded away, but the country flags remained the same. Since 1900, a handful of new national flags have been designed, and a few of them have opted to use purple in their flag, so don't be making any bets just yet.
When it comes to the realms of academia and science, battles are fought whenever new ideas or new evidence emerges to challenge the mainstream understanding of the times. Bloodless wars, but wars nonetheless, are slowly waged across many domains of knowledge, paper by paper and book by book. At stake are the prizes, the label of expertise, the tenure of education, and the authority that derives from establishment. Some of these disputes are precise, using the scientific method of hypothesis, experiment, and result to produce concrete conclusions, to unhorse old ideas, and to move our understanding forward. Such as that which occurs in the disciplines of biology, physics, or chemistry, for example. Other disciplines are less precise and rely on the interpretation of incomplete sets of evidence, the weaving together of data and observation, as happens in fields like archaeology or paleontology. One battle that's been heating up considerably over the last decade is the fight for the foundations of human history itself. I'm not talking about modern history, or even what we refer to as ancient history, at least as we know it in our textbooks today. I'm talking about what happened before this, the ground that the tale of our past is built upon and the basis for all of recorded human history. And that is the timeline of our evolution as a species, our rise from the Stone Age and into the era of civilization. It is these older aspects of our past that seem to be in an ever-increasing state of dispute. The arguments being made are legitimate. They are coming from many different vectors and many different disciplines of science. Many arguments are based on discoveries that have only been made in recent years, and collectively they're making the case for a re-evaluation of the story of our past ever stronger. Everyone is aware of this story to a greater or lesser degree, and in its most basic form, it goes a little something like this. A while ago, we humans, Homo sapiens, evolved and emerged directly into the Stone Age, fiddling with sticks and rocks and contentedly hunter-gathering our days away. It's here that we spend the vast majority of our time on Earth. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years, then all of a sudden, we get the bright idea to team up, raise some forts, build some walls, create some gods, and make some rules. And then, voila, there's civilization. The ancient Sumerians kick us off, then Egypt, Babylon, the Greeks, the Romans, the Mongols, China's great dynasties, and all the rest. Soon we're playing with swords and castles and serfs and slaves. Now it's time to up our painting game, and we have ourselves a renaissance. Someone observes that steam expands, which is still the basis of our entire economy. Even nuclear power stations are just big kettles for boiling water and making steam expand. We begin a love affair with gunpowder and money. We put a meter on electrons and sell them to everyone. And the Industrial Revolution begins the inexorable rise of modern technology. Then, all of a sudden, hello, here we all are, intangibly connected to this thing called the internet, watching thousands of tiny flashing pixels on some device of unimaginable complexity, while sipping a latte, wearing sneakers and synthetic clothing in our paved-over jungle, and mostly doing so as if it was all perfectly normal. The idea that we are all here as the direct result of an unbroken straight line of human progress, coming from the Stone Age, this is one of the foundations upon which our modern human identity is formed. Yet it's this very foundational concept that is under siege. The evidence that our history is longer and much more complex just continues to stack up. The narrative that this new evidence weaves is frankly alarming. It tells a tale of unimaginable destruction, a tale of the rise and fall of unknown yet undeniably mighty civilizations, of advanced technologies that were created, used, and then lost to us. A cycle of death and rebirth on a scale that is beyond anything contained within our current version of history. A version that, in the light of all this new evidence, can simply be considered but the latest revolution of the cosmic hamster wheel of human civilizations. Let's put a few examples of this new evidence into some context. Here's a New Scientist article from 2006, which was, if you're at all like me and in complete denial about getting older, although you wouldn't know it from the music that I still listen to. This article lays out the timeline of human evolution, the mainstream story of history as it was taught in 2006. So let's make a graph and talk about us kids. Around 195,000 years ago, we emerge onto the scene and into the Stone Age. Here we stay for many tens of thousands of years until we start eating mushrooms, having visionary experiences, drawing cave art, burying our dead, creating symbolic and abstract concepts, also called the Great Leap Forward, which was some 50,000 years ago, around the same time that humans first colonised Australia. Then, roughly 12,000 years ago, and still globally in the Stone Age, mind you, modern humans finally reached the Americas. The Stone Age eventually comes to an end only a scant 6,000 years ago from now, when the first true civilization that leads directly to us begins with the ancient Sumerians in Mesopotamia, which was mostly in what's now modern-day Iraq. Now, let's look at some of the new evidence since 2006 and how it should be affecting this timeline. A new find of human remains in Morocco made us instantly more than 30% older than we first thought, pushing the earliest date of our species back to some 300,000 years ago. New DNA evidence analysed from Neanderthal remains estimates our split with them from a common ancestor as far back as 800,000 years ago. Not only that, but discoveries of entirely new species of hominids like Homo floresiensis or the Denisovans is proving that our origins as a species are much more complex than we had ever believed. These hominids weren't simple, dumb creatures, and with finds like the Denisovan jade bracelet, a 40,000-year-old artifact that includes a drill hole, indicates that they may well have been as intelligent, organised, and capable of understanding abstract concepts as our own species. As our timeline extends further back, it also means that we coexisted with our cousins for a very long time. I believe there is much more to find here. New archaeological work has smashed our understandings of human timelines in the Americas, with digs like the Cerruti Mastodon site in San Diego, or the Bluefish Caves, showing that humans may well have been in North America as much as 130,000 years ago, and were certainly here 25 to 30,000 years ago, which is much longer than those dates claimed by the Clovis First doctrine of archaeology, that for so long has strangled open-minded research efforts in North America. Not only this, but DNA linkages between Aboriginal Australians and the natives of South America, linkages that don't seem to exist in the peoples of Central or North America, is challenging the entire Northern Land Bridge theory of the diaspora of humanity. These findings suggest that large populations of people, groups large enough to leave genetic indicators, crossed the Pacific Ocean long before we were ever supposedly capable of such feats. And when it comes to civilization, the story gets even more intriguing, with many new finds pushing our supposed start date back further and further. We had first thought that civilization arose some 6,000 years ago, but the largest megalithic site in the world, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, is now known to have been deliberately buried some 12,000 years ago, likely after thousands of years of use. The redating of the Great Sphinx in Egypt by Professor of Geology Dr. Robert Schoch indicates that this structure is at least as old as Göbekli Tepe, some 12,000 years, and is possibly significantly older. A massive man-made pyramid-like structure was recently discovered in Indonesia at a site called Gunung Padang. It has had carbon dating of organic remains that were pulled from chambers inside the structure that pushes the earliest start date of civilization possibly as far back as 25,000 years ago. It's not just these new findings when it comes to the reasons for a re-evaluation of history. There is a whole other category of evidence in this debate. That category is that in many ways, our current interpretation of history simply does not make sense when you take a close and careful look at it. Contradictions and mysteries abound in our story of history. They attract the attention of interested and open-minded people, despite the efforts of academia, who, in many cases, just declare that no such mysteries exist. These contradictions are often hidden in plain sight. They're in our textbooks, and they're in the astonishing megalithic evidence that is left to us in the ancient places of the world, demonstrated nowhere better than those in Egypt. Just consider the Old Kingdom period, which, according to Egyptologists, arose directly from the primitive Stone Age and whose people did not have the ability to quarry granite. Why then is the Old Kingdom so rich in incredible granite structures that have never seen their match since? How did they build such massive granite artifacts and architecture without the ability to quarry or work this stone? Why were the huge megalithic pyramids, like those at Giza, the earliest pyramids to be built? And this is to say nothing of the mind-bending precision that is evident in this work from the oldest period of Egyptian history, precision that is found in the smallest of objects, like the thousands of lathe-turned exquisite stone jars, to the largest of objects like the Great Pyramid, which even today still ranks amongst the most precisely made structures on the planet. When you look closely, you will find the obvious signs and markings of advanced machining and tools that are not found in the archaeological record. After the Old Kingdom, Egypt kept on building pyramids and they kept on making artwork, but they never came close to reaching the same technical ability that they supposedly did in the very earliest part of their civilization. Ask yourself, is this really how civilizations work? Do they peak instantly and then degrade over time? Another contradiction, this time South America. Why are there three distinct styles of architecture present in Peruvian ancient sites? Three styles that are wildly different in their technological sophistication. Why are these three styles always found in the same order, with the largest and most difficult work at the bottom and oldest layers, with the much cruder, simpler stonework found on top? All three styles are attributed to the Inca alone, whose civilization, mighty as it was, only existed for some 150 years. Does this look like the work of 6 or 7 generations of the same civilization? What can we make of the mysterious precision stonework of Pumapunku and Tiwanaku in Bolivia, or the Cyclopean walls of Sacsayhuaman? Why do so many of these sites show evidence of massive destruction at some distant point in the past? Why does the megalithic architecture found all over the world, from Peru to Easter Island to Egypt to Turkey, match so closely if it is from different civilizations that were separated by not only distance but also millennia of time? Why are we only now, thanks to deforestation, finding literally hundreds of huge geometric earthen shapes, as well as the remains of entire cities in the Amazon jungle? What about the pyramids that are dotted all over China? Pyramids that nobody has been allowed to film, let alone investigate, for some 40 years. None of these mysteries fit within our current story of history. Pyramid culture itself seems to be a constant across many parts of the world. The largest and most famous pyramid of them all, the Great Pyramid of Giza, has yet to give up all of its secrets, despite our modern technology. Every aspect of its construction that we have managed to puzzle out, from its precise alignment to true north and to celestial constellations, its sacred geometry ratios that encode the very constants of nature, to the fact that it is essentially an accurate scale model of the Earth. All of these attributes are like a message sent through time, one that speaks to us of a deep understanding of the universe. An understanding that must have existed far back in the distant past, and an understanding and capability that we simply cannot attribute to what we currently know of the ancient civilizations in our textbooks. Why are there ancient maps like the Piri Reis map or the Oronto-Phineus map, maps that show Antarctica before it was even discovered? Parts of these maps, the accurate parts, were drawn from much more ancient source maps, which, like so many other ancient documents, are now lost to us. Not only is Antarctica shown on these maps, but they accurately depict the coastline of Antarctica that is under the ice, a claim that was verified by experts in the US Air Force in 1960. Several ancient maps show undeniable proof of advanced technology and mathematics in their projections and in their high degree of accuracy in longitude, the measuring of distance to the east and west of the prime meridian. And this is something that was only possible for us to do as a civilization in the 19th century, around the time of James Cook's second voyage of discovery, because of the need for accurate chronometers, which we simply hadn't invented up until that point. I don't think that many of these contradictions, nor these mysteries, can be resolved from within our current paradigm of history. Nor can we truly attribute all of the megalithic work or the ancient high-technology objects that are still left to us to what we know of the great yet primitive ancient civilizations that make up our orthodox version of history. I love and I greatly respect our ancient civilizations, but the reality is some of what we see was simply out of their technological reach. This technological gap between what we know of ancient civilizations and what we see is attested to by so many professionals, craftsmen, builders, and engineers, experts who study these things in detail, people who are far more qualified to offer opinions on ancient technology or engineering than the Egyptologists or archaeologists who commonly deride such opinions but couldn't engineer the chair that they're sitting on when they do it. There is, however, a key that unlocks these mysteries, a solution that makes sense of all of these contradictions. And this solution comes to us from adjacent scientific fields and from a series of discoveries only made in the last 20 years. It's a huge clangor in the story of history. It's something that fractures our established timeline, and it destroys the premise of a single, unbroken line of human progress since the Stone Age, the very premise that the story of history is built upon. It effectively wipes the slate clean, and its impact is such that, were we to be honest, were we to be truly open-minded and receptive to new evidence, we really should be rewriting the entire story of our history from the beginning. This key is known to us today as the Younger Dryas Cataclysm. It happened in the period around 12,900 years ago, and it changed the surface of the Earth. Evidence now shows that the planet was subject to an unimaginably violent series of cataclysms during this period. These events ultimately led to the rapid melting of the continental glaciers, with a series of catastrophically violent megafloods, the signature of which is still writ large in the spectacular landscape of regions like the Channeled Scablands. Up to 10% of the biomass of the planet was on fire, and this period left a signature of destruction found in the strata layers of the Earth at dozens of sites from North America to South Africa. The Younger Dryas ended the glacial maximum of the Ice Age. It killed off fully half of the megafauna of the Pleistocene, up to 80% of all large animals in the Americas. These events and the melting of the ice sheets rose sea level some 400 feet to the current height that they are still at today. This was a very, very dark period for life on this planet, and anything remotely resembling civilization, likely living in the warmer coastal regions at the time, would have been erased almost entirely. Supporting this point, new DNA evidence shows a huge genetic bottleneck and reduction in global population of people aligned with the Younger Dryas period. The most important aspect of this to me, the undeniable fact of this event, is that despite our age as a species, all of our recorded history, all of our evidence for civilization, all of it comes after this world-ending cataclysm. Why do you think that is? Almost every ancient culture speaks to us of this tumultuous period, with their origin stories and their symbolic religions. They speak of cataclysm, of destruction, of flood and fire. They speak of the world being destroyed by a war in the sky, of their ancestors barely living through these events, and later being forced to begin again. They speak of gods, of giants, and of great civilizers with magical, high technology-like powers who came from across the sea. It's not just the evidence for cataclysm that we find in so many ancient tales. There is another curious commonality between ancient myths and religions, and that is that many of them consistently encode advanced celestial knowledge in their symbolic tales. And this case has been made for many different cultures that span the entire globe as well as millennia of time. It's the same information, the same evidence of a deep understanding of the movements of the heavens. This data is encoded into myth and religion, even in some cases where these cultures themselves had no such knowledge. Our own religions, our own modern-day sun cults, they also encode this celestial knowledge, and they also speak to us of cataclysm, of cosmic impacts, and of world-ending floods. Science is now backing up the truth that's encased in these legends and these religions, and the truth of the Younger Dryas Cataclysm. Over 150 peer-reviewed papers have now been published since the theory first emerged in 2006, and in recent years we've even found what may be one of the craters from this cosmic impact, a massive gaping hole under the Hiawatha Glacier in Greenland. So, it is from within this context, the context of cataclysm and near extinction, that the human timeline and the mysteries of the story of history can begin to make some sense. It becomes a tale of inheritance, of extended timelines, of civilizations rising and falling, a mighty global civilization that existed in the distant past, a civilization that was struck down and swallowed by the earth or subsumed by the seas, a civilization that left traces of its greatness in architecture and in artifacts. It left legacies of its knowledge encoded into the cultures and religions of those people that eventually followed. After all, the ancient Egyptians even called themselves a legacy civilization. A legacy of what, or of whom? It is from within this context, the context of a lost ancient high-technology civilization, that the contradictions evident in megalithic architecture could be explained, and the enigma of obviously high-technology objects could be fully investigated and solved. Yet, despite this deluge of new evidence, Our tenured academics and the textbooks in the field of history are very slow to change, if not outrightly hostile towards any new ideas. In many ways, the story of history is very similar to a religious dogma, as ultimately it's just a story, and its high priests of archaeology and Egyptology only really derive their authority from the mainstream acceptance of this story. If questioning this dogmatic version of history is heresy, then this is a label that I happily accept.
The life of the bee will be the life of our race, says Nikola Tesla, world-famed scientist. A new sex order is coming, with the female as superior. You will communicate instantly by simple vest pocket equipment. Aircraft will travel the skies, unmanned, driven and guided by radio. Enormous power will be transmitted great distances, without wires. Earthquakes will become more and more frequent. Temperate zones will turn frigid or torrid. And some of these awe-inspiring developments are not so very far off. From the inception of the wireless system, I saw that this new art of applied electricity would be of greater benefit to the human race than any other scientific discovery, for it virtually eliminates distance. The majority of the ills from which humanity suffers are due to the immense extent of the terrestrial globe and the inability of individuals and nations to come into close contact. Wireless will achieve the closer contact through transmission of intelligence, transport of our bodies and materials, and conveyance of energy. When wireless is perfectly applied, the whole Earth will be converted into a huge brain, which in fact it is, all things being particles of a real and rhythmic whole. We shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance. Not only this, but through television and telephony, we shall see and hear one another as perfectly as though we were face to face, despite intervening distances of thousands of miles. And the instruments through which we will be able to do this will be amazingly simple compared to our present telephone. A man will be able to carry one in his vest pocket. We shall be able to witness and hear events, the inauguration of a president, the playing of a World Series game, the havoc of an earthquake, or the terror of a battle, just as though we were present. Edison had a good deal to do with the bringing out of the telephone. Perhaps he could conceive of something better than the telephone, better than the telegraph, something that would utilize a new force of which mankind is not yet conscious. He could conceive of such a force. So far as I know, there is no quality of the ether that will permit us to send wave impulses in other than the electrical form. But I have no doubt that wave impulses can be sent in other and perhaps better forms. I do know, however, that the present telephone is very imperfect. If you want to know how imperfect it is, read the drug market to a stereographer at the other end of the wire and see how much of it he or she will get. The success of the telephone is due to the human imagination. A man is rung up on the phone. He gets a clue to the identity of the person who is calling him, and if the subject broached is one with which he is familiar, the rest is easy. Mention a name that the other person did not expect to hear, and see how quickly he will break in with a "what's that?" Repeat the name, and finally, spell it. Edison believes the day will come when the telephone will leave little or nothing to the imagination, when it will shout out proper names or whisper the quotations from the drug market. When I am trying to make a thing, I always play my blue chips first. I try to think of the biggest thing that could be done, and then do it. It is more probable that the household's daily newspaper will be printed wirelessly in the home during the night. Domestic management, the problems of heat, light, and household mechanics will be freed from all labor through beneficent wireless power. Perhaps the most valuable application of wireless energy will be the propulsion of flying machines, which will carry no fuel and will be free from any limitations of the present airplanes and dirigibles. We shall ride from New York to Europe in a few hours. International boundaries will be largely obliterated, and a great step will be made towards the unification and harmonious existence of the various races inhabiting the globe. Wireless will not only make possible the supply of energy to a region, however inaccessible, it will be effective politically by harmonizing international interests. It will create understanding instead of differences. I foresee the development of the flying machine exceeding that of the automobile, and I expect Mr. Ford to make large contributions towards this progress. The problem of parking automobiles and furnishing separate roads for commercial and pleasure traffic will be solved. Belted parking towers will arise in our large cities, and the roads will be multiplied through sheer necessity, or, finally, rendered unnecessary when civilization exchanges wheels for wings. Edison ought to know a good deal about transportation, however, so I asked him what improvements were probable in the means of transportation. Edison answered the aeroplane question. He answered it by telling a story. 10 years ago, he was sitting in front of his winter laboratory in Florida. Not a cloud was in the sky. The smoke from a neighboring chimney went up, straight up for 1,000 feet. Almost as high as the pillar of smoke soared a buzzard. Whether the bird circled, slid, or climbed, it never flapped a wing. Always its wings were like the hands of a clock at 2:45. Edison marveled. With no wind blowing, with no wing flapping, what kept the bird aloft? What enabled it to climb after it had slid down the air? I think I know what kept that bird in the air. It travelled on sound waves, and the little pin feathers on the inside of its wings made the waves. The air, when struck with sufficient quickness, is as rigid as steel. Suppose you had 4 million trained bumblebees attached to wire wickerwork on which was sealed a man. Can't you understand that if the bumblebees were signalled to fly, they would lift the man? I believe mechanical bumblebees could be so attached to a flying machine that they would lift it straight up. By mechanical bumblebees, I mean inclined planes revolving upon perpendicular shafts at tremendous speed. And once in the air, ordinary propellers could be used to drive the machine ahead. Edison believes the present type of aeroplanes will soon be discarded, and that bumblebee flyers will carry passengers at the rate of 100 miles or more. Mr. Tesla regards the emergence of woman as one of the most profound portents for the future. It is clear to any trained observer, and even to the sociologically untrained, that a new attitude towards sex discrimination has come over the world through the centuries. This struggle of the human female towards sex equality will end in a new sex order, with the female as superior. It is not in the shallow physical imitation of men that women will assert first their equality and later their superiority, but in the awakening of the intellect of women. The female mind has demonstrated a capacity for all the mental acquirements and achievements of men, and as generations ensue, that capacity will be expanded. The average woman will be as educated as the average man, and then better educated. For the dormant faculties of her brain will be stimulated to an activity that will be all the more intense and powerful because of centuries of repose. The acquisition of new fields of endeavour by women, their gradual usurpation of leadership, will dull and finally dissipate feminine sensibilities, will choke the maternal instinct, so that marriage and motherhood may become abhorrent, and human civilization draw closer and closer to the perfect civilization of the bee. The centre of all bee life is the queen. She dominates the hive not through hereditary right, for any egg may be hatched into a reigning queen, but because she is the womb of this insect race. There are the vast, desexualized armies of workers whose sole aim and happiness in life is hard work. It is the perfection of communism, of socialized cooperative life wherein all things, including the young, are the property and concern of all. Industrially and politically, Edison looks for a lively future. He believes serious industrial troubles, clashes of a sort that will threaten dynasties and thrones, are due in Europe any time, and that similar troubles will be due in this country in 10 years. I believe that all England will someday stop at the sound of one command, and that the command of a working man. Such is the world that Edison sees coming. What a flashlight picture of the future! Man, at last, coming into his own. Because his brain that has developed so slowly has told him that everything on Earth, in the sky and beyond the sky, are his own. That the lightning can be bended to his will, the cataract harnessed to his need, and the dead iron in rocks fashioned into tongues that speak and hands that make. Hands such as never were human hands. Hands that can spin a thread of silk or crush a ton of rock. Hands that can make in abundance whatever human beings need. In such a world, how can there be poverty? There will be no poverty in the world 100 years from now. There is no limit to the cheapness with which things can be made. The world will soon be flooded with the cheap products of machinery, not the poor products, the cheap products. I think the coming farmer will be a man on a seat, beside a push button and some levers. The present trend all points to this conclusion. Edison says that today the most civilized countries of the world spend a maximum of their income on war and a minimum on education. The 21st century will reverse this order. It will be more glorious to fight against ignorance than to die on the field of battle. The discovery of a new scientific truth will be more important than the squabbles of diplomats. The newspapers of the 21st century will give a mere stick in the back pages to accounts of crime or political controversies. It will headline on the front pages the proclamation of a new scientific hypothesis. Progress along such lines will be impossible while nations persist in the savage practice of killing each other off. I inherited from my father an erudite man who labored hard for peace, an ineradicable hatred of war. Like other inventors, I believed at one time that war could be stopped by making it more destructive. But I found that I was mistaken. I underestimated man's combative instinct, which it will take more than a century to breed out. We cannot abolish war by outlawing it. We cannot end it by disarming the strong. War can be stopped, not by making the strong weak, but by making every nation, weak or strong, able to defend itself. I was fortunate enough to evolve a new idea and to perfect means which can be used chiefly for defense. If it is adopted, it will revolutionize the relations between nations. It will make any country, large or small, impregnable against armies, airplanes, and other means of attack. My invention requires a large plant, but once it is established, it will be possible to destroy anything, man or machine, approaching within a radius of 200 miles. I want to state explicitly that this invention of mine does not contemplate the use of any so-called death rays. Rays are not applicable, because they cannot be produced in requisite quantities and diminish rapidly in intensity with distance. All the energy of New York City, approximately 2 million horsepower, transformed into rays and projected 20 miles, could not kill a human being, because according to a well-known law of physics, it would disperse to such an extent as to be ineffectual. Unless mankind's attention is too violently diverted by external wars and internal revolutions, there is no reason why the electric millennium should not begin in a few decades. War being hell, what Edison thinks of war and what he has done to make war more like hell are left to the last. If governments don't heed, Edison believes that they will be destroyed by their own peoples. In his opinion, governments will heed by making the Hague Tribunal the supreme court of the world. He believes the people are going to provide these means. He believes there are stormy days ahead for the man who would take what another man makes. He believes there will be cracks in the walls of government and rips in constitutions, that the working man, the man who will someday say to England, "Stand still," will compel governments to serve him and destroy any government that will not serve him. Moreover, he believes things ought to be changed. Civilization, he says, is not on the right basis. A few are getting too much, and the rest not enough. There will be some big experiments tried in government within the next 50 years. All of us may not be here to see the spectre of poverty laid away, but according to Edison, a few of the youngest will hear the rattle of musketry over its grave.
Space is really hard to survive. It can be scorching or freezing. Ultraviolet and cosmic radiation is everywhere. Radiation is basically the only thing that is present in the vacuum of space. Yet, some organisms can survive this vacuum. The microscopic animal known as the tardigrade is able to survive a journey to space for 11 days and still be alive and kicking after landing back on Earth. Just for your information here, humans can't do that. Without a spacesuit, all the air gets sucked out of our bodies. You pass out in 15 seconds and be dead in 90 seconds. But tardigrades are nothing compared to some of the organisms that life has been exposing to these extreme conditions. Life is the lichen and fungi experiment on the International Space Station, and most of what they do is put things in space and see how long they can hang out there without dying. Lichens are complex symbiotic organisms made up of a fungus and an alga or cyanobacteria. The fungus makes up most of the body, while the alga and or cyanobacteria provide the whole organism with food through photosynthesis. This collaboration between fungi and plants is so successful that it is thought to have evolved independently from each other more than 5 times over the eons. One of the toughest lichens out there is known as Xanthoria elegans. More than 71% of specimens of this species survived for more than 1.5 years, bare naked in space. That's not all. This Xanthoria elegans is also able to survive a pressure of at least 50 gigapascal. This means that this super strong being could survive the first and second phases of the interplanetary transfer process. Wow, lots of complicated words, but why is this important? Because this evidence suggests that life might not have originated on Earth at all. Our planet might just be substrates that is inoculated by the fungi. This concept is called panspermia. Panspermia has many different philosophical approaches. Sometimes I like to fantasize that fungi and their spores are biotechnology engineered by an ancient alien civilization wanting to spread life all over the universe. Anywhere, the conditions are just right. In my mind, they created a massive machine producing countless spores aimlessly wandering in search of a substrate to inoculate. A somewhat more plausible idea is lithopanspermia. Lithopanspermia proposes that extremophile life could survive being blasted into space after its home planet was slammed with an asteroid and part of the crust was shot into space after the collision. After such a cataclysmic event, the fungus and its spores would find themselves flying through space on this most low-tech of spaceships, a simple rock we know as an asteroid. This asteroid could hit a planet in its own solar system, but given enough velocity, it could potentially escape the orbit of its sun and roam its galaxy until one day it hits a young planet ready for life to flourish there. Alright, I might go really far out here, but I don't think that even the hardy Xanthoria elegans will survive such a long trip to space. But its spores just might. Fungal spores can be considered the nearly indestructible cousin of plant seeds. Microscopic little safes filled with DNA that can easily survive space. So much so that the International Space Station is actually facing a mold problem. Marta Kurzau, a microbiologist at the German Aerospace Center, tried to fix the problem by blasting the Aspergillus mold with, and I'm quoting here, stupid amounts of radiation. Up to 1,000 gray. That's 200 more times more radiation than a human could survive. But simply surviving radiation isn't enough to be an interstellar or intergalactic space traveler. You need to be able to not die for a very long time. But fungi got that covered. The oldest viable spores found on Earth are 250 million years old. Let's imagine that BAM was Earth, in a very young stage when our pale blue dot was nothing but water and rock. That the very first organism on Earth was in fact an alien fungus from another solar system, or maybe even an alien lichen. Given enough time, a couple of billion years for example, evolution does its thing. Life becomes more complex, species die out and change form, algae start taking over the waters, the first primitive animals are evolving. Maybe the first fungus is crawling on land. Right now, we believe that life originated about 3.4 billion years ago And we have some solid evidence that mycelium has been around for 2.4 billion years. Although hard to find, the first evidence we have of lichens are from about 600 million years ago. The first animals we have comes in about 540 million years ago. Yet, some people claim that this animal organism, known as Dickinsonia, might actually be more closely related to fungi. If you're open to the possibility, maybe this ancestral animal organism is the missing link between fungi and animals. Let's fast forward a bit to 470 million years ago, when these massive lichens standing 8 meters tall, known as Prototaxides, ruled the earth. Recent evidence suggests they might have been a vital food chain and housing source for the first insects moving from the ocean to land. And yeah, they most likely helped turn the barren rock surface of Earth into soil ready-made for plants to make their move to land. The first evidence we have of plants with roots are peat mosses, about 410 years ago. But here comes the kicker. The first ancestors of mycorrhizal fungi dates back to 460 million years ago. That means we have evidence of mycorrhizal fungi 50 million years before we have evidence of the plants that have roots. A huge reason why some people claim that fungi were the roots of plants before plants evolved to have roots of their own. Nowadays, mycorrhizal fungi connect with the roots of plants in one of nature's most beautiful symbiotic harmonies, pushing forward the evolution of our planet by supporting other organisms and showing us humans a thing or two about collaboration. The great thinker Terence McKenna conjured the stoned ape theory into reality in his book Food of the Gods, published in 1991. In that hypothesis, he argues that human consciousness evolved because of our consumption of entheogenic mushrooms of the genus Psilocybe and Panellus, aka psychedelic mushrooms. Maybe this sounds a little zany, but recent papers claim that, just like us, the whole genus of Psilocybe mushrooms, aka the magic kind, originated in Africa 10 to 20 million years ago, around the same time that humans started diverging from our primate ancestors approximately 13 million years ago. Coincidence? I think not. I believe that fungi were aware of the potential that our ancestors had and decided to evolve a group of fungi that produce mushrooms containing compounds capable of expanding the cerebral capacity of our ancestors. Mushrooms of the genus Psilocybe tend to grow in disturbed areas, places where lots of life roams. Grazing animals lived close to our ancestors, and everyone knows what grows out of their tongue. But even more obscure entheogenic mushrooms like Psilocybe semilanciata, also known as the Liberty Gap, grow in disturbed areas, open grass plains like meadows, lawns, and pastures. Psilocybe cyanescens, also known as the Wavy Gap, and many more wood-loving species of Psilocybe primarily grow on wood chips, especially in and along the perimeter of mulched plant beds in urban areas. It's almost as if these fungi are saying, "Eat us! We know you're here! Eat us!" This idea is fortified with the overwhelming evidence we have of these mushrooms helping with some of the biggest plagues of our time: anxiety, depression, PTSD. One could argue that they want us to consume them to help us out. But maybe. Back to space, or more so, our interest in space. We've always gazed upon the stars. It's part of what makes us human and part of what we've lost in the urbanization of our civilization. Light pollution kills the connection to our astral bodies in such a manner that when I grew up in the Netherlands, one of the most light polluted areas in the world, I was never even aware of the phases of the moon, or even able to see most of the constellations our ancestors could see. Ever since we could dream while awake, we've dreamed of the stars. You could almost say it's part of the human condition. Now, the question is, was this an accident, or is this by design? If you adhere even slightly to the stoned ape hypothesis, and you know how huge a role fungi played in the evolution of our consciousness, who says they ever stopped doing this? Maybe we are not much better than the simple carpet ant being controlled by Ophiocordyceps unilateralis. Our mind is being taken over for a much greater goal, though, to get to space.
The secret history of LSD is the story of the struggle between good and evil in the human heart. All the threads of life and death, virtue and virulence, hell, the deep journey from cosmic emptiness to the illumination of galaxies, are stored in the conscious reservoir accessible through LSD. Dr. Stanislav Grof called LSD a non-specific amplifier of the unconscious. It magnifies what is already inside us, magnifies the struggle between good and evil. Its extraordinary powers were discovered accidentally in 1943 by the Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann, who intended to create a new migraine pill out of ergot, a fungus that grows on diseased grain. Refined ergot had been used for centuries as a medicine, as a psychedelic mystery sacrament, and as a way to teach people the secrets of witchcraft. During the synthesizing process, Hofmann unintentionally ingested a small amount of LSD. He then took perhaps the most famous bike ride in history. The following morning he felt positively rejuvenated, saying, "I had the feeling that I saw the earth and the beauty of nature as it had been when it was created. It was a beautiful experience. I was reborn, seeing nature in quite a new light." Despite such auspicious beginnings, he later called LSD his problem child after the social uproar it caused during the late 1960s. But the secret history of LSD is not one of a problem child, but rather one of a wonder child whose awesome power amplified the timeless struggle between good and evil during the mid-20th century. And that struggle has implications today. The next moves we make are going to have a tremendous impact on the future of this story. What made LSD so attractive was the way it evoked what philosophers call mind at large. Mind at large represents every thought of every entity, human, animal, and extraterrestrial, that has existed since the Big Bang. And we are all hardwired into it. Accordingly, the human brain acts as a pressure valve, which guards our consciousness against this total sensory overload. LSD eases that valve, allowing the very building blocks of creation to flood the mind. The obvious question arises: who would control this awesome power? Various interests like the medical community, the CIA, and modern mystics all saw themselves as the true keeper of LSD's potential. Initially, LSD found a home in therapeutic settings, helping people sort out their innermost suffering, finding that bridge between mental hell and mental health. People lined up to take LSD. In fact, they demanded it. Treating these personal problems served as a way to nourish the larger society. LSD was going to heal the planet. One trauma, one anxiety attack, one depressive episode at a time. Many of the doctors giving LSD to patients also enjoyed the medicine themselves. For ages, intellectuals had sought a way to touch both the deepest parts of their being and touch the deepest parts of the cosmos. This principle has been articulated in many ways, but my personal favorite phrasing goes, "As above, so below." LSD was the long-awaited celestial adhesive that bridged the holy heavens to the human heart. The very doctors who saw LSD as a medicine for their patients saw it as a metaphysical tool for themselves. But this duality, this above and below, comes with a sinister side. You see, sometimes the very tools of enlightenment, the very tools used for good, are used instead for abhorrent purposes. LSD offers one such example. Half a century ago, LSD was taken out of the mental health clinic and into the war room. The CIA sought to use the non-specific amplifier of LSD as a mind control weapon under a top-secret operation called MKUltra. It was here where LSD revealed the true depths of depravity found in the human heart. MKUltra personnel felt that unsuspecting people would make the best targets. And so they launched Operation Midnight Climax to secretly drug American citizens. Through Midnight Climax, the CIA funneled money to a man named George Hunter White, who used the funds to rent apartments in New York and San Francisco. He would then frequent the local bars and lure both sex workers and their clients back to the apartment to secretly dose them with LSD. He wanted to see if LSD could be used to put a person, a foreign leader perhaps, in a compromised sexual situation for later use in blackmail. Midnight Climax did not work out well operationally. Many of the dosed victims huddled in the corner of the apartment, too terrified to speak, let alone discuss sexual habits. They no doubt suffered long-term, untreated trauma from the experience. George Hunter White had very little regard for the human devastation he caused with LSD, saying of this time, "Sometimes when people had information, there was only one way you could get it. If it was a girl, you put her tits in the drawer and slammed the drawer. If it was a guy, you took his cock and hit it with a hammer. And they would talk to you. Now with these drugs, you could get information without having to abuse people." MKUltra also tested LSD on children who were taken to secret locations where they were sexually humiliated and trained as assassins. One young girl abused by these trials later testified, "They would perform radiation as well as mind control and drug experiments on me. I would receive intensive electric shock, isolation for days, sleep deprivation where they would attach electrodes to me, and if I started to fall asleep, they would shock me." She was 10 years old at the time. One of the doctors abusing these children was Wilson Green, who admitted, "I like scaring them. They and the agency think I'm a god, creating subjects and experiments for whatever deviant purposes they can think up." MKUltra left behind a trail of human devastation and 2 deaths. Well, at least 2 deaths that we know about. The CIA found that they could not turn LSD into a weapon, so in 1973 MKUltra was totally abolished. With the question of an LSD weapon abandoned, more compassionate researchers started to ask new questions. Is there a consciousness out there in the universe? A supreme principle? Can that highest consciousness be reached through the byways of our own neural circuitry? Was LSD the key? Some LSD aficionados, like the author Aldous Huxley and the philosopher Alan Watts, thought, yes. They formed secret societies around the Los Angeles area in the late 1950s, using LSD in modern adaptations of ancient pagan mystery ceremonies. One doctor who was also a part of this LSD society stated, "We saw ourselves as members of a consciousness clan that goes back through history to Eleusis and the Sufis and the Vedic Hindus." A different side of LSD was now being specifically amplified, not as a weapon, or even a therapeutic medicine, but as a sacrament. To many who were working with LSD in this way, it sat right beside the wheel, fire manipulation, and toilet paper in the annals of great human achievements. Many saw it as a vital epoch in civilization. And so artists, mathematicians, homemakers, professors, and scientists all took LSD, hoping to find the natural triggers of human evolution. This, of course, raised questions about the nature of God and the meaning of life. And so clergymen started participating in LSD sessions, blessing their psychedelic congregants and offering spiritual advice during the peak. An LSD-using Bible study group even formed in Palo Alto, California. All of this was eclipsed by the tumultuous 1960s, when media manipulation, fear-mongering, and irresponsible use by unprepared explorers unfairly cast LSD into disrepute. LSD was eventually criminalized in the late 1960s, but its influence did not die. Instead, it went underground, planting the seeds that would one day blossom into the kind of culture that would accept it. Now this is where we come in. The secret history of LSD teaches us that LSD is not a magic bullet that guarantees love and enlightenment. Its awesome powers can be used just as easily for evil. But this comes with a bonus. By acknowledging our own shadow side, we can be more forgiving of others and build a more tolerant, less polarized world. Our culture is fractured, but perhaps there is an opportunity here. We are being given a chance to once again demonstrate the value of LSD and bring that secret history to light. As more and more cities, states, and countries decriminalize all psychedelic medicines, we have the ability to direct the fate of this non-specific amplifier. That is the magic we all have within us. So let's close our eyes and just imagine what we could amplify.
The ancient Egyptians were far ahead of their time. They had advanced agriculture, architecture, writing, and even birth control. Astonishingly enough, the ancient Egyptians had just about every method of birth control we use today. The oldest and possibly most bizarre was the use of crocodile dung for contraception. After mixing the reptile's feces with fermented dough, women would sprinkle the concoction in and around their vaginas to block sperm from reaching their uteri. Some researchers think that the alkaline nature of the feces could have killed the sperm. But, as you can imagine, it's difficult to find participants who are willing to test this method out. A few hundred years later, Egyptian women enlisted the help of the acacia tree in their contraception efforts. Women mixed unripe acacia fruit with honey and ground dates. They soaked a piece of cotton or other plant fiber in the paste and inserted it. This method of birth control was more effective than you might think. Acacia gum ferments into lactic acid, which can act as a spermicide. They even had a birth control pill. Estrogen hormones are used in modern-day pills to prevent ovulation. Ancient Egyptians seem to have understood this because they consumed handmade pills from ground pomegranates, which actually contain high levels of natural estrogen. Men also took it upon themselves to prevent birth. The very first condoms were discovered in Egypt dating back 3,500 years ago. These condoms were made from fine linen soaked in olive oil or from the intestinal membranes of sheep. Interestingly enough, lambskin condoms are still popular today. Ancient Egyptians even had accurate methods to test for pregnancy. Women would pee on a barley plant. If the plant grew, it meant she was pregnant. This test has been confirmed by modern science. The pee of a non-pregnant woman does in fact prevent barley from growing. Christmas is the most iconic holiday in the world, and it's full of strange traditions. Activities like hanging stockings and singing songs about flying reindeer have become so deeply ingrained in Christmas that we don't even wonder where they came from. When we trace the origin of Christmas traditions, we find that many of them can be linked to the rituals surrounding the psychedelic mushroom Amanita muscaria. The large red-white spotted Amanita muscaria is the most recognizable mushroom on Earth. Throughout history and across many cultures, people valued this mysterious mushroom for its powerful hallucinogenic properties. For over a millennia, the indigenous people of the Arctic collected Amanita muscaria. These people were called shaman. The word shaman is derived from the Tungus-speaking people of Siberia and connotes a religious specialist. Each year, the shaman would pick the Amanita, dry them, load them into a big sack, and then on December 21st, during the winter solstice, the shaman would go from house to house delivering their gifts. These shaman were older bearded men who wore the symbolic colors of red and white to honor the mushroom. During the winter solstice, the entryways to people's homes were buried under several feet of snow, so it was easier for the shaman to drop the mushrooms down the smoke hole. This is where the idea of presents down the chimney comes from. The colors of Christmas are red, white, and green. These colors symbolize the red and white Amanita muscaria under an evergreen tree. Amanita muscaria is found throughout the northern hemisphere under conifers and birch trees, just like red and white presents under the Christmas tree. Although deaths are extremely rare, Amanita muscaria is poisonous. In order to reduce the toxicity, shaman would hang the mushrooms on tree branches for them to dry, just like the colorful ornaments on a Christmas tree. Santa's flying reindeer have a similar connection to the Amanita muscaria mushrooms. Reindeer are common across Europe and Siberia, and just like the human inhabitants of these areas, they too consumed mushrooms. Siberians who ate the mushrooms may have hallucinated that the grazing reindeer were actually flying. Siberians would also drink the urine of the reindeer because the urine contained the hallucinogenic compounds without the harmful toxins. To add to things, Rudolph led the other flying reindeer with his glowing red nose, which might have been a representation of the Amanita muscaria leading the psychedelic journey. And it's possible that the idea of helper elves assisting Santa might go back to the spirits encountered by the shaman during a mushroom trip. In fact, the entire image of Santa Claus himself closely resembles that of a mushroom. While there are many theories about the true origin of Christmas traditions, this excerpt from James Arthur's book, Mushrooms and Mankind, probably best summarizes the Santa magic mushroom theory. Why do people bring pine trees into their houses at the winter solstice, placing brightly colored, red and white, packages under their boughs as gifts to show their love for each other and as representations of the love of God and the gift of his son's life? It is because under the pine bough is the exact location where one would find this most sacred substance, the Amanita muscaria, in the wild. As humans organize themselves into larger, more densely populated cities, the potential for infectious disease becomes ever more present. Massive urban areas are like a ticking time bomb for infection, with humans, animals, food, garbage, and sewage stacked tightly on top of each other. It sets the stage for the perfect breeding ground for disease. Our ancient ancestors lived in small, isolated tribes that had very little opportunity to spread germs beyond their community. But after the advent of agriculture, tribes abandoned their nomadic lifestyles and organized into stationary civilizations. Since the dawn of civilization, mankind has dealt with epidemics, plagues, and pandemics. For most of history, city life consisted of overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. Food would often be prepared next to open sewers, while rats, cockroaches, and rotting corpses polluted the drinking water. These early cities also featured humans and animals living in close proximity to one another, conditions that are strikingly similar to those in Wuhan, China, the source of the coronavirus outbreak. These tight living quarters gave rise to the spread of zoonotic diseases, which are contagions transferred from animals to humans, such as COVID-19. Zoonotic diseases have been around since the earliest cities, but they would not become pandemics because these cities were isolated from one another. Once civilizations expanded into vast trading empires, the possibility for widespread disease was unleashed. The first major pandemic was the Plague of Justinian, which struck the Byzantine Empire in the year 541 AD. The bacterium responsible has been identified as Yersinia pestis, commonly known as bubonic plague, a pathogen carried by rats and transferred to humans through fleas. After the plague had run its course, 25 to 50 million people had died, which was about a quarter of the Earth's population then. The plague returned with a vengeance 800 years later as the most infamous pandemic in human history. In 1347, ships returned to the shores of Sicily filled with sailors stricken by a mysterious illness that formed dark swellings, or buboes, in the armpits and groin. This symptom led to the nickname Black Death. The Venetians banned sailors from entering their cities for 40 days. In Italy, this was called Quaranta Giorni, which means 40 days, and explains where we get the word quarantine in English. While these quarantine efforts did help to deter the outbreak, in the end, the Black Death took up to 200 million lives across Eurasia. Europeans also had to endure many endemic diseases like measles, chickenpox, and especially smallpox, which killed millions over several centuries. Ironically, these endemics would pave the way for Europeans to colonize the Americas. Native Americans lacked any kind of immunity to these foreign pathogens, and once exposed, over 20 million or 90% of the pre-Columbian population would be wiped out. In the end, it would not be steel or guns that would conquer the New World, but infectious germs. And perhaps we are still feeling the after effect of the horrendous Spanish flu to this day. The most recent mass pandemic struck in 1918 and infected 500 million worldwide. Unlike most diseases, Spanish flu impacted young adults the hardest. Half of those that died were between the ages of 20 and 40, and 99% were under the age of 65. By the end of 1920, Spanish flu claimed the lives of 50 to 100 million. Since these dark ages, we have made great advancements in sanitation, plumbing, medicine, and personal hygiene. It is highly unlikely that COVID-19 will come anywhere close to Black Death or Spanish flu, but this does not mean it should be taken lightly. As a species, we must evolve, learn, and adapt if we want to survive. Just about every culture, race, and religion acknowledges the value of gold. Humans have been infatuated with gold for as long as we have recorded history. Millions have died for it, entire civilizations were built upon it, and even many cryptocurrencies are backed by it. Gold was the driving force in the European conquest of the Americas in search of places like El Dorado, a city entirely made of gold. And we can't forget the mass migration to the western United States in the gold rush of 1849. Even the gods wanted gold. According to the Sumerian tablets, the oldest written record we have, gold was the entire reason for creating mankind, so we could be slaves to mine gold for the gods. Aside from being shiny, gold is incredibly durable and malleable. It does not corrode or rust like other metals. It can easily be shaped into statues or coins that stand the test of time. But there are many practical uses for gold. NASA uses gold in their spaceships and astronaut suits because it blocks harmful radiation rays. On a monoatomic level, it can be used to achieve profound health benefits. Gold is not toxic and integrates well with the biology of the human body. It is used to detect cancer cells and in certain cases has even been known to attack and destroy prostate cancer cells. When injected into joints, gold can reduce pain, swelling, damage, and arthritis. However, gold is extremely scarce. All the gold we have on Earth came to us from asteroids that crashed here 200 million years after the Earth was formed. There is no way for humans to reproduce gold, so every ounce has to be mined. In fact, gold is so scarce that if you gathered all the gold we have in the world, it would only fill 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools. But there was one point in time when gold was not as scarce, thus not worth very much. In the early 14th century, Emperor Mansa Musa of Mali ruled West Africa. He had more gold than anyone in history. His net worth, at value today, would be $400 billion. That's over 3 times richer than the richest person today. In 1324, Emperor Mansa Musa went on a pilgrimage across Africa to visit Mecca. On his trip, Mansa traveled through regions that were dirt poor and spent insane amounts of gold along the way. He bought livestock, food, art, antiques, built mosques, and was just plain generous. In total, he spent at least 256,000 pounds of gold on his trip, estimated to be worth $4 billion today, still a small fraction of his total empire. The effect of his generosity was gold became less scarce, so it drastically lost its value in the region for a full decade. 1 pound of gold was worth less than 1 pound of salt. Since Mansa Musa, the value of gold has remained solid. Gold has proven to be one of the smartest, safest investments over time. But could we see a day where gold becomes worthless again? It appears as if we may be at the beginning of a second gold rush. The gold will not be created in the lab or found anywhere on Earth. This next gold rush will be in space. Many asteroids in the inner solar system are rich in metals. As resources on Earth become more scarce, the possibility of asteroid mining becomes more realistic and financially viable. With the rapid growth of space technology and private companies like SpaceX, plans are in the works to mine asteroids by 2024. If successful, our scarce depleted resources on Earth could experience an endless supply of abundance. Why only 28 days in February? The reason can be traced back to ancient Rome. In the 8th century BC, the Romans used the calendar of Romulus, a 10-month calendar that kicked the year off in March with the spring equinox and ended in December. January and February didn't even exist. The calendar year was only 304 days long. Back then, winter was a nameless, monthless period that no one cared for. The calendar was primarily used as a timetable for planting and harvesting agriculture. To farmers, winter wasn't worth counting. So for 61 days out of the year, Romans could ask, "What month is it?" And you could correctly answer, "None." King Numa Pompilius thought that was stupid. Why have a calendar if you're going to neglect 1/6 of the year? So in 713 BC, he lined the calendar up with the year's 12 lunar cycles, a span of about 355 days, and introduced January and February. The months were added to the end of the calendar, making February the last month of the year. However, the Romans were highly superstitious. They believed even numbers were unlucky and invited attacks from evil spirits. So Numa tried to make each month odd. But to reach the quota of 355, 1 month had to be even. February ended up pulling the short stick, probably because it was simply the last month on the list. Of course, a 355-day calendar had its bugs. After a few years went by, the seasons and months would fall out of sync. Summer would arrive in October, and winter would end up in June. So to keep things straight, the Romans would occasionally insert a 27-day leap month called Mercedonius. The Romans would erase the last couple days of February and start the leap month on February 24, further evidence that no one ever cared much for February. This caused headaches everywhere. The leap month was inconsistent, mainly because Rome's high priests determined when it would arrive. Not only did they insert Mercedonius randomly, but the priests, being politicians, abused the power, using it to extend the terms of friends and trim the terms of enemies. By Julius Caesar's time, the Roman people had no clue what day it was. So Caesar looked back to the solar calendar of the Egyptians to reform his calendar. To get Rome back on track, the year 46 BC had to be 445 days long. Caesar aligned the calendar with the sun and added a few days so that everything added up to 365. February, which by now was at the top of the calendar, kept its 28 days. However, it takes 365.24 days for the Earth to make a complete rotation around the sun. That extra 0.24 days adds up to just about 1 full day every 4 years. So once every 4 years, February gets an extra 29th day, also known as leap year day. But 0.24 times 4 doesn't quite make a full day. So to make sure that we don't get ahead of ourselves, once every 100 years, we skip leap year day. So these are the origins of our chaotic calendar. It may not be pretty, but it does seem to work now. Neanderthals are our closest extinct human relatives. They lived in Eurasia 200,000 to 30,000 years ago. Their appearance was similar to ours, though they were shorter and stockier with angled cheekbones, prominent brow ridges, and wide noses. They were perfectly evolved to survive the eternal winter of the Ice Age. Initial discoveries of Neanderthals made them out to be savage cannibals, but new evidence has been unearthed that has spiffed up the image of the Neanderthal people. Like us, they made tools, wore clothes, controlled fire, cared for their sick, and buried their dead. They also possessed the same variant as us of the FOXP2 gene, essential for language, so they probably spoke. Perhaps they even painted and engraved on the walls of caves. So if the Neanderthals were such an intelligent, well-adapted species, why did they go extinct? A popular theory is that humans wiped them out. We had much more advanced tools and social systems. Humans also domesticated wolves, which made them far superior hunters. Humans' dominance for scarce resources at the end of the Ice Age could have pushed Neanderthals to extinction. Perhaps it was a natural disaster that killed off the Neanderthals, or climate change, or a disease. Another emerging theory is that the Neanderthals never actually went extinct, but instead inbred with the larger human population. There was roughly a 5,000-year period where both Neanderthals and humans lived in Eurasia together. During this period, there was inbreeding between the two species. The proof is in our DNA. In fact, about 1.5 to 2.6% of the DNA of anyone outside Africa is of Neanderthal origin. Researchers think that 20% of the Neanderthal genome is still found within humans, so they never exactly went extinct. Instead, their DNA just became part of the modern human genome. So, now that we know we have Neanderthal DNA coursing through our veins, what exactly can we do with this information? Well, it turns out that these Neanderthal genes can affect your personality. Psychologists have found that individuals with a higher level of the Neanderthal genome have an aversion to strangers and are more prone to nervousness and anxiety. So basically, the more Neanderthal you are, the less social you are. This makes perfect sense, since Neanderthals were much less social than humans. So the next time you're feeling antisocial at a party, ask yourself, is this a lame party? Or am I just being a Neanderthal?